In this video, I tell you whether Warhammer 40,000's Chapter Approved 2017 supplement is something you actually need. So those of you who've played Age of Sigmar will probably recognize this as a relatively familiar story. Age of Sigmar came out, free rule set. Download it, it's a 4-page PDF, or you can get it through the app, all that kind of jazz. And that's really cool. And then they came out with, because they didn't come out with points right away. They didn't come out, it was just open play, knock yourself out. And there was much gnashing of teeth. But then eventually they came out with something called the General's Handbook, which had points for all the different forces in it. It had a bunch of scenarios and a bunch of cool stuff and whatnot. And they said, hey, we're glad you guys like this. We're going to start doing it every year. And they came out with the first one, which was just called the General's Handbook, and then they came out with the second one, which was, strangely enough, called the General's Handbook 2017. So if you're new to Warhammer 40,000, 8th edition, or if you're just getting back into it or whatever, you're going to find something pretty much along the same lines, and it's called Chapter Approved, and again, 2017. So what they're doing with this is that this is a book that will be sold every year for Warhammer 40,000, just like they're doing for the General's Handbook for Age of Sigmar. And this book is something that you'll buy, and then you'll use the stuff that's inside to play. Now, you're saying to yourself, well, but Uncle Adam, I just bought the big, thick, hardcover rule book for 8th edition because I'm either getting in for the first time or getting back into it, and now you're telling me that I need to buy this book too, which costs $35. That's not kind of really cool, is it? Well, not necessarily. It's not something you necessarily need, and I'll explain a little bit more. So let me just say right off the bat, if you are just now getting into Warhammer 40,000, 8th edition, I would tell you, if you're still building your models and maybe you've played like a 500-point game against your friend or whatever, or you've done a little bit of open gaming with no points or whatever the deal is and you're still in progress, I would tell you, do not rush out and buy this book unless you got an extra $35 burning a hole in your pocket or you're just really super curious. This is not a necessity of a book, okay, for the beginning player. This is aimed towards a bunch of different people, and the beginning starter player, not necessarily. This is aimed a little bit more towards people who've played a bunch of the other missions already and they want new kind of missions and scenarios. People who want to, find out all kinds of the new stratagems and sort of benefits that the armies that don't yet have codices can get. Like right now in here, there's stuff for all of the armies that don't have a new codex, a new hardcover, 8th edition codex. So Space Wolves and Dark Eldar and Tau and all those different guys. There's kind of tide you over until the codex sort of special stuff in this book, which is sort of nice if you're into that. And of course, there's also points updates for all the units that are currently in the game, including Forge World, which is kind of interesting. What these are is it's kind of like a frequently asked questions sort of update where it's like, okay, so originally in the book, whether it's a codex or an index, we said that this is going to be this many points. And now after, running the numbers and looking at it and talking to people, we're going to change it either, higher or lower, depending on the situation. Now, a lot of people are saying that I've seen online, they're like, well, why am I paying for a frequently asked questions? Well, you're not. The frequently asked questions, as it turns out, are still free PDFs, and they're doing pretty good work with those, in my opinion. This is a little different. So if you play in the tournament scene and you're pretty serious about it, this whole video, you know what I'm talking about because you've probably already got this, because this has got not only the updated points and things like that, which you definitely want to make sure that you understand if you're a tournament player, but there's also a bunch of other really cool things in here, tweaks to the rules that different tournaments are using, some of them aren't using. One of the big ones is in normal 8th edition 40k, when we are both, you and I as players, when we're doing the whole kind of back and forth thing, deploying our units, when we do that, I deploy a unit, you deploy a unit, back and forth until one of us runs out of units to deploy. Then, at that point, we kind of, well, basically what it does in the rules is it says that, let's say I ran out of units to deploy, well, now I get to go first. And a lot of tournament players didn't like that. So there's a special rule in here that says, actually, if you run out of units to deploy first, you get a +1 to the roll to see who rolls first. Things like that. Things like you can't spend your command points to do stuff like, change certain rolls anymore, things like that. If you're a tournament player, and if the tournament organizer for the tournament you're going to is using the rules out of here, you're going to want to know them, and you've probably already got this book. All right, so what else is in the book? Why might you want it? Well, the book is laid out basically with a whole section about open war, an entire section about narrative campaigns, narrative play, and then matched play. After that, there's an index with all the updated points and all the other junk like that. But the interesting stuff is the open play, which really they're just basically kind of lumping Apocalypse into the open play category. Now, if you are relatively new to Warhammer 40,000, Apocalypse is a style of play where you and nearly everyone that you know that has models all brings them to one place at one day, and then you are there for hours and hours. I mean, like seriously 12 hours, and you just play a giant game on a huge table with just a huge mess of stuff. And, for people who really dig that kind of stuff, they really dig that kind of stuff, and they do it, not super frequently because it's really hard and it takes a lot of time, but they do it pretty frequently. I've played an Apocalypse game once, and I won't do it again. That's just my personal preference. Your mileage may vary, but it was a little too much overstimulation. When I'm playing a miniatures game, I generally like it to be either 1-on-1 most of the time, or maybe 2-on-2. But, like 12-on-12, that's, for me, hard. One thing that's also really cool about the open play section, besides all of the, Apocalypse stuff, if you're into that, there's also an entire section in here about how to kind of custom design your own Land Raider. It gives you a whole bunch of, it's not like a points thing because it's the open, play where you're not really using points. It's more of like, a Land Raider can carry this many people, and depending on what weapons you add on it, take away how much space there is left on the inside. And then you can do all kinds of stuff. And then they give you a bunch of example variants in here as well, as Terminus Ultra is a fun name. Wrath of Malnar, that one's good. Angel and Furnace, that's going to be good for your Blood Angel fans in the family. And so it's kind of neat that they give you that ability to sort of get underneath the hood, so to speak, and kind of design your own Land Raider. But it's specifically, like it even shows in the pictures, it's specifically just for open play. Do not bring that shenanigans to a tournament. They got big red stickers everywhere on everything that say open play only for when they're doing that. But it's cool that you get to have the ability kind of with this instruction manual on how to make it happen. There's also a very deep section about narrative play. So narrative play, for those of you who are relatively new, narrative play is kind of like we're going to tell a story with the game. So instead of just like you and I both have an equal amount of points and we play against each other and it's technically fair, or we just bring a bunch of stuff and sit it down and have a good time, which is what open play is, narrative play usually starts with like, well, you have this and your opponent has this, but then in turn 5, then this might happen. And it's driving what's happening in the game a little bit more based off of a story versus the other way around. Whereas in normal situations, you play a game which sort of makes a story. In this situation, the story is kind of in control of what's going on, and that's what a narrative campaign is. Very frequently, it's played over multiple game sessions where you play this, and then whoever wins the first thing, then something might change in the second thing, and if this guy would have won it instead, it would have gone this way or whatever. And so it's a chain of events, and the best narrative campaigns are designed to not totally make it unfair. Like in the first game, if Team A wins, they shouldn't have a super huge benefit throughout the rest of the campaign, because then it's all comes down to who wins the first game, really. Good campaigns allow it to be able to swing back the other way, and there's a lot of campaign information in here. And a lot of different deployments and different types of things like that, which really, I think, for me at least, as a guy who's a little bit more interested in sort of the story kind of stuff and the hobby more than the tournament play, this is something that is really kind of nice, and there wasn't a lot of in the main thick book, in my opinion. And then there's matched play, which is what the majority of people generally have a tendency to play when they play 40k. This is points. This is, I have 2,000 points and you have 2,000 points, and we're going to play against each other, and it's supposed to be equal as far as our sides are concerned. There's differing opinions on whether that's actually the case or not, and it depends, and it's difficult. But what this does is it gives you new scenarios, because there's a certain number of scenarios in the original thick hardcover that's got the rules. Well, there's a bunch more that come in here, and they're not just simple like, oh, okay, well, we'll just do it. There's a lot of stuff in here, both Eternal War and Maelstrom of War. There's 6 new ones for each, and then there's also, I mean, there's even a hobby section. It goes through and shows you, well, you're going to need objectives for your, your matched play type games. Well, why don't you make some cool looking ones that look like this? There was not really much in the way of hobby stuff like this in any of the General's Handbook type things that have come out so far from Games Workshop, at least not that I remember seeing, that just stood out to me. And there's pages and pages, Tau, Orc, Chaos objective markers, cool Necron ones. I mean, there's all kinds of interesting stuff. Even the Drukhari, which is Dark Eldar. Let's just all get on the same page with that. And then here's the section I was talking about before that is updates for the armies that don't yet have any real codex. They're still using the indexes that were released at the launch of 8th edition. Imperial Knights, Necrons, Orcs, Space Wolves, Tau, Thousand Suns, etc. Sisters of Battle, all that stuff. And then there's a big appendix that goes on and talks about battlefield terrain and gives you a bunch of kind of cool optional rules for the different types of battlefield terrain out there. And because they've released a whole bunch of new stuff since. And then, of course, the points and all that kind of stuff, like I mentioned before, that your tournament players are specifically going to be focusing on. It's not a book, like I said, especially if you're starting out. This is not a book that you need to rush right out and get. You can play 40K with the book that you've already got, and you can play it for quite some time, probably have a great time with it. And then at some point, if you're like, you know what, I want to start trying out some different types of missions, or I'm kind of getting interested in an apocalypse, and let's see if me and my 6 or 5 friends or whatever can all, lump our stuff together and have a good, really long, super long afternoon / into evening battle. That stuff's in here, and it will allow you to kind of learn more about different ways to play the game. And again, like I said, it's $35, and it's also a yearly book. Now, what this means is that next year, 2018, there'll be another book that comes out. The only stuff in here, really, that won't still be the case in some fashion, that still won't be true, will probably be the points upgrades. Those will probably be all new sets of points upgrades. That's the way it worked in the General's Handbook for Age of Sigmar. So that part will be, I don't want to say obsolete, but it will be different in the new book. But all the rest of the information in here, all the open play stuff, all the narrative stuff, all the match play scenarios and all that jazz, that stuff will all still be good. So it's not like when the next book comes out, you take this book and you chuck it because, well, new version's out and I just wasted $35. This book will still be good. There'll just be a very small portion of it that will be kind of trumped by the new book. But everything else, all the other stuff in here, still quite usable. So that's the trick. It's up to you, again, depending on where you're at in your Warhammer 40,000 hobby journey, whether this is something that you're really interested in. If you are just a collector and like to buy all the books that come out, well, then go grab it. It's $35. If you're looking for more stuff to read, even though you're just starting or just getting back into it, there's interesting stuff in here. If you're getting into the game and you're feeling kind of overwhelmed and there's a lot going on, I would not suggest getting this book, because the book that you've already got, the big thick one, the main rule book, is good enough. I mean, it's got a lot of stuff going on there. If you play a lot of points games with people and they're real, specific about the rules and stuff like that as far as points, well, then maybe you need to pick this up. But if you don't, and you're pretty new and trying to get, further along, I would say you could spend that money on more models or more paint or something like that, because this is not a limited edition book. This will be good until next year when they release the next one. And the idea behind all of this overall, this whole, we're going to keep cranking these books out every year like this, is because they don't want, from what they've said, to have to make a 9th edition 40K anytime soon. So this allows 8th edition to be extended for hopefully quite a long time. The difference between 6th edition and 7th edition was 2 years, okay? I was assuming that was going to be the case amongst 8th, and I said, mark my words, and I was wrong. I will admit it. It took 3 years until they came out with 8th. But now I think by doing this chapter approved thing and making basically these additions and upgrades, they don't necessarily have to make a 9th edition book in 2 to 3 years. They can let it go a little bit longer, let the rules kind of grow a little bit more and move along, and make updates and additions and all kinds of things like that in these cheaper books. So if you're in the mood, pick it up. But again, remember, if you're just starting out and you're just getting into things, you don't have to grab it right away.